Crimson Peak.
Weaved with untold mysteries that give you chilly bones and horrifying events, the film opens in the year 1887. In the very beginning, we see a young woman, covered in blood, standing in the snow. She tells of the time she first saw a ghost and recounts the tragic funeral of her mother who died of black cholera and had a closed casket funeral. Showing Edith's traumatic and lonely past, Edith has a terrifying encounter with her mother's restless spirit. Wrapping her dark, decaying fingers around young Edith's shoulder as the girl shudders in her bed trying to will away her terror, the ghost whispers a warning. When the time comes, beware of Crimson Peak. Being haunted by your mother's ghost is mentally scarring, isn't it? Scenes shift to the present in 1901, which is 14 years after the funeral tragedy. We get a proper introduction to our main character, Edith Cushing, who is an aspiring writer of ghost stories, living in Buffalo, New York. Edith is the daughter of a very rich businessman, Mr. Carter Cushing, who is a self-made industrialist. Edith's caretaker, Dr. Alan McMichael, is also introduced, who is very kind compared to his snotty and condescending family. With hopes of getting her spooky articles published, Edith takes her writings to a publisher named Ogilvy. Ogilvy is a misogynist who isn't expecting horror from a young girl. Edith tries to justify that despite her articles sounding spooky and scary, the main focus of her article is more of a metaphor, implying ghosts are illusions from the past. This quote perfectly sums up this entire film, as the ghosts are never truly the main focus of the film. Edith aspires to write about the ghosts she sees and encounters, though it is implied that her mother is the clearest and most intimate encounter she has ever had. Instead, she is pressured into writing about romance as it is expected of her gender. What a sad tragedy for her. After being rejected by Ogilvy, Edith expresses her concern to her father, who then gives her a pen. Edith writes the story and it fails, though it passes the eye of a visiting aristocrat seeking funding for an invention of his own from Edith's father. The aristocrat is Sir Thomas Sharp of Allerdale Hall, which is located atop a mine for red clay soil that is used in brick-making and rendering for iron ore. Being wary of aristocracy, the New York gentleman, Carter Cushing, turns away the Cumbria-born Sharp with extreme distaste. Thomas turns his attention to Edith and gains her affection by crediting her as a gifted writer and storyteller who doesn't merely write ghost stories, but rather writes stories that happen to have ghosts. Thomas Sharp arrives at the Cushing Manor and charms his way into bringing Edith along as his date to the McMichael party. Thomas introduces Edith to his sister, Lucille Sharp, who doesn't appear to be pleased by the sight of Edith's arrival. Thomas asks Edith for dance and impresses the entire room by performing a waltz while holding a flame to a candle. The entire time, with his rising suspicion, Mr. Cushing hires a man named Holly to do some private investigating on Thomas and Lucille Sharp. Edith meets up with Alan, who shows her several eerie ghostly photographs. He then tells her to be careful about her friendship with Thomas Sharp. Despite the red flags, Edith is charmed by Thomas and gets herself involved in a romantic affair with Sir Thomas that is watched closely by her childhood friend, Dr. Alan McMichael. Someone should warn the flattered Edith and stop her. Subsequently to that, we see a very suspicious conversation between Thomas and his sister Lucille about Edith that revealed that they are up to no good. Poor Edith doesn't know about the tragedy she's about to get involved in. While in a freaky conversation with Lucille, Thomas asks her for the ring on her finger and says that she will get it back once he is successful. This sounds like Thomas is going to propose to Edith with his sister's ring. Incest vibes already. Mr. Holly returns to Mr. Cushing with his findings, which contain bad news, but we don't get a glimpse of what he has discovered. During a dinner party, he asks to speak to Thomas and Lucille in private. He reveals that he is aware of their secret and bribes them with a check to return to England. He also tells Thomas that he must thoroughly break Edith's heart for the check to clear. Thomas announces his departure at the dinner table, which upsets Edith, and he then reluctantly proceeds to break her heart in full view of everyone. Mr. Cushing sure looks like he got his money well spent. We also get a very eerie shot of Lucille watching the events unfold from the shadows. The next day, Mr. Cushing is brutally murdered while shading in the bathroom. An unknown assailant smashes his face into the sink several times, killing him on the spot. Well, that's only the beginning of Edith's bad times. Edith, who is not aware of her father's death, wakes up to a letter from Thomas professing his love for her and revealing that Mr. Cushing paid him off to hurt her and leave. She eventually meets up with Thomas, who tells her that he could not leave her, and the two share a very passionate kiss. Little does Edith know how deceiving Thomas is. Edith is soon delivered with the tragic news of her father's passing and is forced to identify his body at his funeral. Edith attends the funeral with Thomas by her side. Thomas is now wearing the ring previously worn by Lucille. Looks like he is all set for his mission. In the wake of his untimely death, Edith seeks solace in her romance with Sir Thomas, who gently and tenderly seduces her into leaving New York and moving in with him in his home in England to escape the ghosts of her past. Thomas gets his manipulation trait from his sister, Lucille, for sure. They are greeted by a servant named Finley, who says that Thomas has been married for a while. Confused, Edith asks him what he means, but Thomas diverts the topic by adding he has no clue. A small dog suddenly appears out of nowhere, seemingly famished. Edith decides to keep it. Indeed, the dog was summoned for a clear distraction. They enter the large and beautiful mansion, but strangely, it is in terrible shape. There is a large hole in the ceiling and red clay seeps from the floorboards with a very blood-like appearance, as the manor is located directly above a clay mine. Its unofficial name is Crimson Peak due to the red clay beneath it, though this is not mentioned to Edith at first, so the warning is not heeded. That's exactly what Edith's mother was hinting at in her terrifying encounters with Edith. Newly shifted, Edith takes a look around her new home. While looking in the mirror, Edith sees the ghostly shadow of a woman walking behind her, believing it to be Lucille. She follows the ghost, who then takes the elevator shaft upstairs. Thomas reassures her that it must have been just a shadow and warns her never to take the elevator to the lower level, and this the beginning of Edith's worst nightmare. On the lower levels, Lady Lucille lives, who is already cold and distant towards Edith. Despite her charming brother's demeanor and her apparent warmth for her brother, she becomes crueler and more controlling of Edith. Lucille is so controlling that she even denies giving Edith a copy of the keys to the rooms of the house, let alone handing her the actual keys. Edith is once again visited by the spirit of her mother, who again wraps her fingers around Edith's shoulder and offers the same warning: beware of Crimson Peak. Well, if it's only advice, can she appear in a little less horrifying way? Edith becomes inconsolable after visits by other ghosts who begin to terrify her, but Lucille firmly insists that it's all in her head. As Edith's inquiries about the houses and the family's history begin to become more vocal, ghosts begin to appear all the more, beckoning her to the mines below. Edith explores the mansion and pieces clues together, discovering that Thomas previously married 3 wealthy women. Edith must take the hint that she's the next bounty Thomas and his sister are after. Despite a warning from her husband, who is awaiting the fortune of the late Carter Cushing, who is revealed to have been killed by Lucille, Edith ventures into the attic where the 2 siblings were holed up by their abusive mother, and to the rendering vats below in the mines, where she uncovers the decaying corpse of Sir Thomas's last victim. Surely Edith is not going to end up like that. She's a survivor. One of the ghosts lures Edith to a linen closet where she discovers wax cylinders on which one of Thomas' previous wives recorded a message telling her that the Sharp siblings are poisoning her for her inheritance. Thomas and Lucille have been using the inheritance of brides whose families lost their patriarch to fund Thomas's inventive efforts. It is revealed that the siblings conspire to murder the holder of the fortune if necessary, and then the woman herself. This explains why they killed Carter Cushing first. It is also revealed that Thomas has an incestuous relationship with his sister, who seduced him at a young age. The main evildoer of Lucille also conspires to free them and never be apart by killing their mother, who had discovered the siblings' sexual relationship. Left with the house to tend to, the 2 clung to their cursed surroundings and began the plots of marriage and slaying out of necessity. Sir Thomas has truly fallen in love with Edith, however, and cannot this time bring himself to do the deed. Deep down, we knew Edith's love was going to change Thomas and that he was sick of being his sister's puppeteer. Insane with jealousy and greed, Lucille loses her calm demeanor and becomes a feral killer. Then we see that McMichael arrives to take Edith back to New York, only to be stabbed and wounded terribly by a knife-wielding Lucille. Realizing that his wife is in mortal danger, Thomas helps Edith escape the house and is killed by Lucille in the process, becoming the better man he had always wished to be. Thomas's death is a loss that leaves Edith mourning. On the other hand, Edith becomes enraged that the man she loved was so corrupted by Lucille. She strikes back with an equally large butcher knife. The 2 women battle one another intensely, with Lucille doing considerable bloody damage, but ultimately being slain by Edith herself. Leaving the corpse of Lucille, Edith returns to the house and rescues McMichael. Told you Edith wasn't going to end up like the rest of Thomas and Lucille's victims. The two escape to a nearby city while the film reveals the images of the Sharp siblings' ghosts now residing in the home. Lucille has become a ghost and continues to play the piano and seems to have her eyes filled with hate, while the once charming Sir Thomas is steeped in sorrow and shame. The final shot implies that Edith has now written a best-selling book about her experiences, which is appropriately titled Crimson Peak. Despite the film being made from a horror aspect, the director of the film has portrayed his message very beautifully and poetically, which says, "All ghosts are illusions from one's past." The film not only spooked us out with the bewildered creatures, but also gave us a glimpse of the great period drama, poetry, aristocratic architecture, and exuberant clothing of that era. The actors, Tom Hiddleston and Jessica Chastain, also played very realistic and convincing antagonists. If you are tired of childish jump scares and basic horror, you should put Crimson Peak at the top of your list because it has all the juice to satisfy your cravings for psychological horror that will haunt your bones for a long time. Thanks for watching another Essential Recap. Please like and subscribe, and leave a comment what you'd like to see next.